There were several players that had a really hard time placing on this list, and Teddy Bridgewater was definitely one of those, largely because he's only really played one game in the past several seasons. This guy definitely had a lot of promise his first couple of years, although he didn't necessarily have the most fantastic numbers, while his career high in passing yards is just 3,231, which is definitely not very much. It's worth mentioning he just didn't throw the ball a lot. A large part of that Minnesota Vikings offense was not led through him, it was led through the running game. He still averaged a very respectable 7.2 yards per attempt over his career, so it's not like he's a bad player by any means, he just doesn't have those bulk stats. And as a young player, you definitely expect that young player to continue to grow and continue to improve as a player. However, that became a lot more difficult when he suffered a pretty terrible injury that cut him out of the entire 2016 season and almost out of the entire 2017 season. He now kind of had no choice but to just take a backup role and hope that he can work his way back up as a starter. And it's also worth mentioning that in his one start with the Saints in week 17, he only had 118 yards. But when I watched that game, I was actually filled with more promise than I was filled with, oh no, this guy doesn't have it anymore. I know that might seem strange considering the fact that he did not put up very good numbers, and they lost the game to a not very great Panthers team. I mean, granted, the Panthers were a good team overall, however, late in that season, they definitely had been struggling a lot. But one thing I was really impressed with him is how athletically well he was able to play. I mean, the guy is an athlete, and he was able to play like an athlete on week 17. Like on this play, it's a good example. They're going up against a cover one hole, and here's how it's going to work. Bridgewater is going to fake a play action to the bottom half of the screen, but then he's going to cut back up to the top half of the screen. So he does that, and now there is a Saint open. However, of course, this is a very tough throw for a right-handed quarterback to make. He's going to have to turn his body around and try to hit that open receiver, which is not going to be easy to do. Granted, he probably should have just turned his shoulders and done that now. That's what I would have recommended, actually. However, he's not going to do that, but that's okay. Part of that is I don't think he felt comfortable turning his shoulders that early into cutting the round. He wanted to wait a little bit more so he could actually turn his shoulders all the way and then make a throw. So now, as you see, he does turn his shoulders and the receiver is open, but it's worth mentioning, just because he turned his shoulders doesn't mean that he's not off balance. He is definitely off balance on this throw. But that doesn't matter too much, as he's able to make a very good throw off balance on the run to make sure that they can get a first down off of it. That's a great athletic play more than anything. Relatively smart play too. We found an open man and he executed the play the way it was supposed to be executed, but really what I'm impressed by that is like, okay, this guy has bounced back from his injury. This guy is at what he was when we left off. There is also this next play where once again it's going to be play action, and take a look at what's going to end up happening here. Basically, it's a disastrous situation. There is a Panther running straight for Teddy Bridgewater, and I'm sure Bridgewater is saying, oh no, I'm going to die. Okay, well maybe that's not what he's actually saying, but it's certainly what I would be thinking. However, look at how Bridgewater is able to just so easily just shake him off. I mean, that's just like ridiculously easy. That's kind of like in the video game when you have your breaking tackle at 100. It looks way too easy. Like, that shouldn't happen for Teddy Bridgewater. Also, now he's on the bottom half of the screen. However, almost every single Saints player is on the top half of the screen. This isn't really his fault because, he had to get around that tackle more than anything. He had to try to get outside the pocket because there was no room left in the pocket. Of course, there's 4 eligible receivers down there, not 5, and the 5th one is going to be right over there. But one thing I like about Bridgewater is basically just look at his patience. Look at how long he waits until he actually makes this throw. He does not rush this in any way because he doesn't have to, because he's not under pressure. One of the luxuries of being out of the pocket is you kind of have way more time to try to make a throw. Of course, the disadvantage is now you have to make a throw off balance, but as I showed him from that last play, Bridgewater can make a throw off balance. Once again, if you just look at him, look at how awkward he is trying to throw this ball. This is not great quarterback form, but it's kind of the best form you can have when you're running outside the pocket like this. But it's also worth mentioning he only has to throw this ball 5 yards, so he doesn't have to worry too much about maybe not having the best form. Obviously, if you can square your shoulders, then square your shoulders, but if you can't, it's not the end of the world. Bridgewater is able to flip it up and able to pick up a decent gain, despite this play almost being a sack right when it was snapped. I mean, this went from a 2-second long play that results in a sack to a very good gains. And granted, it should be mentioned that entire game, he definitely didn't have the best game overall. But if you actually watch the tape, he didn't have a ton of really bad plays. He was kind of just okay and had a couple of good plays that I showed you. I could dive a little bit closer into that game, however, I think just trying to look into one game in particular won't really do the best job of trying to explain an entire player's talents. And I know that it's been a minute now since he started for the Vikings, however, I do think this will probably be the best way of measuring just how good he was, or at least how good was he when we last left off with him. I would hope that he's actually a better player now because he has more knowledge, however, you also don't know because there is a little bit more rust. And that's also partially why I'm not going to be breaking down that Saints game too much other than talking about how good he is physically, because I'm sure that there was some plays that he just didn't perform on as well just because he had a lot of rust to kick off of not playing for 2 years. But anyways, one thing that can definitely be mentioned about Teddy Bridgewater is the fact that he definitely likes to play things a bit safe, and that's not always a terrible thing. Like on this one, those are going to be the routes that the receivers are going to be running. And what you'll see is right after this ball is snapped, one thing in particular is that their plus receiver right there on the top half of the screen is kind of open. I mean, he's actually easily open, but there's one problem, is the fact that because it's the play action, Bridgewater is pretty far back, and it's also the ball was snapped on the bottom hash mark, so that means that he's pretty far to the bottom half of the screen as well, making this a very far throw. Meanwhile, he also has another receiver that'll probably be a safer situation over there if the pocket can hold for long enough, and he could try to throw it there. Obviously, it's less far down the field, but it's also a less risky play, because if he does try to get it to that plus receiver and kind of lays it up there, it could end up being a pick six. So Bridgewater is going to play it safe and hit the receiver and pick up only a couple of yards, so that's kind of a safe play there. It gained 3 yards instead of taking a chance for the first down. I know legendary Vikings quarterback Brett Favre certainly would have taken that shot deep downfield. Sorry, Packers fans, I can't resist. But that's not what Teddy Bridgewater did. He played it safe, and you could definitely debate whether that's the smart play or the dumb play. However, that is the type of play that he will often make. The fact of the matter is, that's just the type of player he is. But one thing I want to be clear on is, it's not because he can't throw the ball deep. He definitely has a good medium ball and a good deep ball, and this play would be a good example of him throwing the ball down the field and it working out pretty well. Not tremendously downfield, they're starting the ball at the 15-yard line. You can only throw it so far down the field, but just stay with me here. It's going to be a cover one hole, and those are going to be the routes that the receivers on the left side of Teddy Bridgewater are going to be running. So against a cover one hole, actually that route that the slot receiver is running up to the top half of the screen could actually be a pretty great route to run. It's going to be just one-on-one coverage, and he is running deep, where potentially if he can win his one-on-one matchup, this could be a touchdown. Bridgewater knows all this, and so he's going to look to try to take a shot there. As of right now, that defensive back is going to try to create contact, and really at Bridgewater, he doesn't know what's going to happen here. He sees that contact is about to be created, but he has no idea if this is going to end up being a touchdown or if the receiver is going to get slowed down and he'll just throw it over his head. But for Bridgewater, either way, that's a good decision to try to throw it there, because if there is enough contact that everyone slows down, well then the ball would just simply fall incomplete. But if the receiver can win his one-on-one matchup and get away from that contact, this could result in a touchdown, so he's going to say, hey, I'm going to take a shot here. This ends up being a perfect pass. The receiver does win his one-on-one matchup, and it results in a touchdown. Just a tremendous play by Bridgewater of understanding his situation and also just making a great throw. I mean, that definitely helps. I mean, let's be honest, every decision looks like a genius decision when you make a throw like that, so really just great play by Teddy on that one. Also in that same game, and honestly that was probably Teddy's best game of his career so far against Chicago, but once again in a red zone situation, it's going to be a cover one hole, and this time those will be the routes that the Vikings on the bottom half of the screen will be running, and there is a curl route, and as we all know, curl routes are good routes to run against man coverage. And it's even better when you can get that open, right? So that's where Teddy should try to throw the ball to, correct? I mean, maybe you could throw it there, or you could look to see what else is open. I want to be clear for a second. Just because I say Teddy Bridgewater is a safe player, and because he is a safe player, that doesn't mean that he won't make some smart decisions to pick up more yards if they're available, and this time there is a smart decision that he can make that'll pick up more yards because it's available. If you notice, there is a gap that he could potentially run through right over there, and since it is man coverage, there is nobody in the middle of the screen right now. While it was a cover one hole, both those Bears who were in charge of covering the middle of the screen both ended up going over to cover other guys, meaning that the gap in the middle of the screen is completely wide open, so Teddy's going to say, hey, let's take a shot. He's also a good enough athlete to run, accelerate quick enough, and get over the line for a touchdown. Just a great play by Bridgewater of understanding his situation this time, and also, again, being a good athlete. I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but it's because he does these kind of things a lot. I mean, when I keep saying he understands the situation, it's because he understands every situation. Situational football is important, and Teddy Bridgewater definitely is a smart player. I definitely think there's a reason why the Saints are so determined to keep him as their quarterback even when they have Drew Brees. I'm pretty sure that Teddy would have probably gone to a different team had he felt like he had a chance to start somewhere else, but I would bet, and this is total speculation, but it would make sense to me, that I would bet that there is some sort of handshake agreement that whenever Drew Brees retires, then Teddy Bridgewater would be the starter after that. That's kind of what I'm assuming. Again, total speculation, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just something that I think might be the case. One last game I want to talk about when talking about Teddy Bridgewater was the infamous Blair Walsh game. A lot of people probably look at that score and say, wow, 10-9, he must have played pretty terrible, right? Well, no, that's not what happened at all. Teddy actually played pretty well, and you gotta factor in the fact that this game was like negative 100 degrees, and meanwhile he's going against a Legion of Boom defense, so this is probably the worst case scenario you could possibly have as a quarterback. But again, I actually thought that he played very well in this game. Like on this play, one thing you'll notice right at the top of the bat, that whether this is man or zone coverage, that receiver right there in the top half of the screen is going to have a one-on-one matchup against that Seahawk right over there. And so for the Vikings, they're running play action, and that receiver is actually going to be running a curl route here, and as I've mentioned earlier, that a curl route is actually a pretty decent way to beat a one-on-one matchup. But one thing I like about Bridgewater is he is barely even wasting any time at all. He does a good job of selling the play action. He definitely takes his time to sell the play action. But the second he finishes that, he's turning over and he's looking at his receiver that he knows could get open. That receiver isn't open now, but he's about to be, and the second he is, Bridgewater hits him and they're able to pick up a decent gain. I think if I had Teddy Bridgewater and I was designing an offense around him, I would probably have a run-heavy offense, but that's not because I don't trust trust him. That's because I do trust him to make a lot of those short to medium range passes. And having a run-heavy offense can definitely help open up those short to medium range passes and make things even easier for him. So that's what I would personally do if I was an offensive coordinator for Teddy Bridgewater. There was also this one, which was actually a pretty creative play call. It's a play call I like a lot. I actually talk about a similar play like this in my video for the number 33 quarterback on this list. But anyways, going back to this video, basically it's going to start off as though it's looking like it's going to be a pick play, where they're going to have a receiver basically just take one step closer to the middle of the screen, and then they'll have another receiver look like he's about to block that defensive back right there. However, that's not what he's doing. He's then going to cut and run a slant route. And this is also going to be play action. But what I really want to take a look at is take a look at how well this play fake is going to work on the bottom half of the screen. I mean, right after this ball is snapped, it just works out perfectly, and that receiver is now wide open. There's a huge gap to try to hit him. But the one kind of problem is if you look at Bridgewater, he just had to fake that play action, and it was actually a bit of a high snap. So this now means that his hands are not where he wants to be in terms of a throwing motion. He's going to have to get this ball off very quickly to try to hit that receiver as quick as possible because there are Seattle defenders fastly approaching. But one thing I haven't mentioned about Teddy Bridgewater yet is his quick release. This guy has as quick of a release as anybody in the league. Look at how he's quickly able to just get it over there, hit his man, and able to pick up some yards. That's just good football right there. So those two plays were great, but again, what do you think about when you think about this game? If you're a Vikings fan, you probably just think some words that I will not repeat on this video or it will get demonetized. But if you're a fan of any of the other 31 teams in the league, you're thinking the Blair Walsh missed kick. It was just an infamous missed kick. It was the most Vikings thing that could happen to the Vikings. However, you can't be in position for a kicker to miss a chip shot field goal if you don't get in position to make the chip shot field goal to begin with. And as I talked about in my Blake Bortles video of a guy who was able to come through in the clutch, Teddy Bridgewater absolutely came through in the clutch this game. And really, it was this play that should have been the game winner. This should be the play that Vikings fans look back on and say, man, this was awesome. There was only 1 minute and 34 seconds left with the Vikings trailing by 1, so this is a crucial play right now. First off, this is going to be a cover 3 zone, which is actually perfect for the Vikings because they have a route concept specifically designed to beat cover 3. And for good reason. The Seattle Seahawks run a lot of cover 3 zones, so why wouldn't you design some plays against cover 3 zone? First things first, they're going to have their plus receiver in the top half of the screen run a go route. The purpose of that route is obviously pretty simple. It's to get the Seahawk who's in charge of covering that zone on the top left-hand corner of the screen to go as far deep as possible. From there, they'll have a halfback basically run straight over there, and again, I know these colors are kind of difficult to see. The problem is with that shadow right there. If I use yellow, then you won't be able to see because of the shadows in the way, and I've already used black, so I don't really have many colors left to use here. So I'm going with this one. It's a little bit tough to tell, but I'll also explain what's going on in case you can't see them. Basically, he's going to run in the gap in coverage in between those two gaps on the top half of the screen that are in the midfield. Doing this will draw the Seattle defenders who are in charge of covering the midfield further in. Then in theory, they can send another Vikings player past those players who are in charge of covering the midfield, but before the safeties, since this is a zone buster where they're going to have several players both try to stretch out that gap in coverage as much as possible, this is basically exactly what you want to run against this kind of defense. And now, as you see, one of the Seattle defenders who's in charge of covering the midfield is now breaking in. And the Seattle defender who's in charge of covering the zone on the top left-hand corner of the screen is breaking farther out because of the Viking going in that direction. So this now means that this play at this point is working perfectly. However, Seattle has a lot of smart defensive players. So that guy's going to realize what's going on, and he's going to break up to the top half of the screen to try to make this a contested throw. He's not going to basically just give it to them. So this now means that instead of having a receiver wide open, this receiver is only a little bit open. It's going to take a good throw to get it there, but that's exactly what's going to happen. Bridgewater makes a great throw, and then they're able to break a tackle and pick up some yards. Again, I know they ended up losing this game, and it was all for nothing, but that's clutch right there. That's a clutch play to get your team in position to win the game. I don't think being clutch means everything. I'm not even sure if I would actually have anyone jump a spot if just because they're clutch. However, I do think it can be a tiebreaker. In fact, to give you a little teaser on what my video will be for the next player I'm putting on this list, it's going to be someone who actually had a very bad playoff performance. It's definitely something you like when you get a quarterback, of someone who won't buckle under the pressure, and Bridgewater won't buckle under the pressure. At least that's my opinion, and that's why I have him at number 35. Let me know what you think. Should he be 35, or should he be way lower, way higher? Again, he's so hard to put on this list, so it's really tough. But that's just where I have him and why I have him there, and I think at the very least, I'm doing at least a decent job of explaining why I have each of these guys in these spots. And that's basically my goal. I definitely don't expect you guys to totally agree with me on each one of these picks, but I'm hoping at the very least you'll understand where I'm coming from.